Well, hello there, watching the press preview. A first look then at what is on the front pages. Time to see what's making the headlines with the political editor of the Daily Mirror, Pippa Crerar, and the deputy political editor of the Daily Mail, John Stevens, with us from now until just before midnight. And welcome to both of you. So to the front pages then, let's start with the Financial Times, which leads with the Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey's admission that he and the bank have been unable to stop inflation hitting 10%, chiefly because of a series of economic shocks, including the war in Ukraine. Well, The Guardian picks up on his remarks as well. Bank chiefs warning over apocalyptic food prices. The Telegraph has a virtually identical lead headline. Bank chief food price rises will be apocalyptic, as you can see. And let's take a look at the Daily Mail. Very similar. Bank chief families are facing food price apocalypse. Petrol firm profiteers fail to pass on duty cut, reads The Times' headline, as Tories call for a crackdown amid new highs in fuel prices. Daily Mirror focusing on calls for a windfall tax on energy firms to ease the cost of living are expected to be blocked by Conservatives. Here's the Metro, their headline, proud to say I'm gay, referring to Blackpool footballer Jake Daniels, who today became the first professional player in the UK to make such an announcement. As also on the front page of the Eye too, which draws attention to Jake's wish to inspire Premier League stars. While the Sun leads with the libel trial, dubbed Wagatha Christie, and quotes Colin Rooney in the witness box, where she described Rebecca Vardy's texts as evil. Well, reminder that by scanning the QR code that you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. So we're joined then by Pippa Crerar and John Stevens. Welcome to both of you. Clearly there's news from Mariupol tonight and this Azovstal steel plant, but across the newspapers it is the effect of the Ukraine war that we are reading about, and the impact of soaring inflation, energy prices and, of course, food prices, Pippa, too, and this warning from the Bank of England governor.
Yeah, there was a very striking hearing in the Commons today with the Bank of England governor at the Treasury Select Committee, in which he basically was asked whether he could do anything more to control inflation, and he effectively said no. This is obviously ahead of the latest inflation figures, which we're expecting tomorrow, likely to top 9%. Now, if you think about the fact that the target initially was 2%, I mean, that's dramatically higher. But then the admission from him as well that there's very little that at this point that the bank could do to counter this. Obviously, the bank's been facing criticism that they didn't do more to put up interest rates sooner. Traditionally, that's seen as a mechanism to try and control inflation. And although they put up interest rates incrementally in the last 4 meetings that they've had, they didn't do it at the end of last year. And Andrew Bailey made a point of saying that they couldn't have predicted that the Ukraine war was going to have this impact. Although, you know, I think we could contest that a bit. Lots of people were talking about the prospect, not least in Britain, the prospect of a Russian invasion at the end of last year. It's really difficult for them, though. There are lots of other external pressures, not least the ongoing COVID crisis in China and the supply chain issues that has as a result here. And Bailey suggested that about 80% of that extra inflation that we're seeing is due to overseas factors. So much of it is out of his hands, still painting a pretty grim picture as the cost of living crisis continues to grip.
Yes, and Andrew Bailey saying the most important thing we can do is to get inflation back to target. And many people suggesting, and this was perhaps, you know, the accusation is he was heading some of this off, that actually the Bank of England should have acted sooner. John, what do you reckon?
Yeah, well, Andrew Bailey is already coming under criticism from some people within the cabinet and some Tory MPs. You saw Mel Stride, who's the Tory chair of the Treasury Select Committee. That's the committee that was interviewing Andrew Bailey today. He suggested that the Bank of England had possibly been asleep at the wheel over the last few months, that it hadn't moved quick enough on interest rates. But this warning from Andrew Bailey on food prices is particularly striking. You know, terms such as apocalyptic, that's usually the job of journalists to insert words like that into stories. You don't usually hear them from the mouths directly of people like the Bank of England governor. And he was talking about how he'd had meetings, I think it was at the IMF in Washington, with the Ukrainian finance minister, and he'd given a warning on food prices that, Ukraine is obviously very important across the world for producing wheat and cooking oil. And he was suggesting that even though they're not having problem with planting those at the moment and harvesting what that they produce, the problem they're having is shipping it out of the country. And that situation is getting even worse. And so the suggestion that Andrew Bailey was making, that we're going to see food prices rise even further, which is going to make life even more difficult for people who are struggling to make ends meet.
The specifics, The Guardian saying countries such as Egypt and Tunisia, we've always said North Africa, haven't we, rely heavily on exports of Ukraine's wheat and cooking oil. And we know from Snake Island right to Mariupol, the Black Sea is a tough place to be, is it not? And such a crucial exporter of those goods. The Daily Telegraph, again, this word apocalyptic. I mean, how should people feel at home? The Daily Mail as well, apocalypse. The people who are already struggling see that word. This is very difficult for people looking forward to this year and knowing that energy prices will go up again come October, Pippa.
Yes, and of course, it's not just the sort of international food prices that people will be concerned about. Obviously, Andrew Bailey made the point that he was thinking about international food prices when he used that term apocalyptic, not necessarily food prices at home, though inevitably the knock-on effect of inflation is, of course, that they go up as well. We're also seeing diesel hitting a record of £1.80 a litre on the forecourts, which will be difficult for a lot of small businesses and drivers as well. That's likely to get even worse if the EU follows through on its suggestion of stopping importing any gas and oil from Russia. That's going to put more pressures on fuel supplies. Ofgem as well, the Energy Watchdog announcing today that it's going to look at looking at implementing the cap 4 times a year instead of twice a year. So consumers are therefore going to have 4 hikes potentially of their fuel bills a year in the next few years. And all set against this sort of backdrop of the government so far making a sort of an actually fairly limited package of support for people through their energy bills and a loan, and secondly through council tax rebates. And they're under huge pressure as every day goes by to increase the support for people and not to wait until the autumn, as Rishi Sunak has consistently said that he would do. The government has also pointed out, of course, there are international factors at play here, but it's not just that. The government made the decision to put up tax, put up national insurance, and of course to freeze those thresholds, which is effectively a tax rise, on the same day that other cuts were coming in, and that and the hike in the spring hike in the energy bills. So the government does have some responsibility here for making the situation worse, and they're not yet looking to make any announcements certainly in the coming days and weeks to ease that pressure, but coming under huge pressure to do so. Whether we see emergency budget or not, I don't think that we're there yet, but I think it's almost certain that they're going to have to make some sort of announcement before the summer on extra support, targeted extra support for the poorest households.
Well, while we reflect on the impact of the war in Ukraine, let's just take a look at the extraordinary photograph in the Times before we return to this issue. This is one of the hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers under siege, or had been under siege, in the Mariupol steelworks, because the breaking news tonight, as we hear from Ukraine's Deputy Defence Minister in a video on Telegram, that according to her, 53 seriously wounded servicemen have now been evacuated from the Azovstal plant in Mariupol to a medical institution in the town of Novoazovsk in a Russian-controlled area, and another 211 people taken to Olenivka through humanitarian corridors. These are the images posted by Reuters. She said that an exchange would be held to return them home. Apologies, Associated Press, these pictures. President Zelensky has also responded now in a video also on Telegram, saying thanks to the actions of the Ukrainian military, the armed forces of Ukraine, intelligence, as well as the negotiating team, and the International Committee of the Red Cross and the UN, we hope that we will be able to save the lives of our guys. I want to emphasise that Ukraine needs Ukrainian heroes alive. This is our principle. And John, the suggestion is that there will be a prisoner swap. But, you know, we've all watched the pictures at Azovstal, you know, in horror. We've seen the injuries. We know they've run out of medication, antibiotics and so on. Is this ultimately, you know, a good result for Ukraine and its fight against the Russians?
Yeah, everything that's gone on in that place has been absolutely horrific. And the stories you talk about there, running out of medicines, we've just heard them week after week, the absolutely horrific conditions there. And I guess it is a good thing that these people have been able to get out, it looks like safely. You hear those quotes there from Volodymyr Zelensky saying that they have had to use a kind of prisoner swap by kind of releasing people in exchange for these people. But they must be just great relief there that these people are finally being able to get out of that steelworks.
Yes, and Pippa, we return to other matters in terms of cost of living, but I did just want to reflect on that breaking news. The Times is talking about petrol firm profiteers failing to pass on duty cuts. It's long been some angst, has it not, the petrol retailers? But anyway, what's this story about in the Times?
So the Times story is that the RAC has suggested that retailers are taking 2p more in profit per litre of fuel sold than they did before Chancellor reduced duty in March. If you remember, there was a very big moment in the Commons when Rishi Sunak decided that announced that that fuel duty would in fact go down. It's been obviously called for as part of a response to the cost of living crisis, and yet the RSCs found that many of them had failed on that they'd failed to pass on nearly half of that 5p fuel duty cut. Now, bottom line is that this is yet another area where, particularly with pressures on energy supplies increasing globally as a result of the Ukraine crisis and sort of sanctions that have been placed on Russia and the West attempting to find other alternative sources of fuel. There are already huge pressures on prices at the pump. But it looks like some of these firms are also trying to make a sneaky cut. And of course, that's very much not what the intention was of the Chancellor, to give them sort of like the room to do that when he reduced fuel duty. His aim was that fairly minimal cut, actually, when it came to it, given the soaring prices, was passed on to consumers. And that hasn't proved to be the case. So I think that they will come under quite a lot of pressure, if not from the government itself, and certainly from campaigning backbenchers of the likes of the Tory MP Robert Halfon, to act and to pass on those savings to customers instead.
I'm just going to return to Azovstal. The Reuters news agency is quoting the General Staff of Ukraine's armed forces and says the Azovstal servicemen have fulfilled their combat mission and they were ordered to save lives, so that would imply they were ordered to surrender, and continues to say that efforts are continuing to rescue the defenders who remain on the territory as Azovstal. So we wait to see if there are more who still need to come out of the enormous steelworks there in Mariupol. We'll certainly keep an eye on that story. Well, plenty more still to come on the programme as well, including we'll continue to have a look at the headlines. The Metro, the headline, "Proud to say I am gay," the Blackpool footballer. Well, welcome back. You're watching the press preview. With me now, the political editor of the Daily Mirror, Pippa Crerar, and the deputy political editor of the Daily Mail, John Stevens. Welcome back to both of you. Plenty more to discuss then. I'm afraid we didn't get to see the Mirror, did we? The windfall tax you talked about. But let's move on to the Metro, which tonight is reporting the news of the young footballer, the 17-year-old Jake Daniels, hailed as an inspiration, Pippa, after becoming Britain's first male professional footballer to come out as gay in 32 years, would you believe it?
Well, this is a brilliant story. I mean, this guy is 17. He's a teenager, and he's been brave enough to come out in a sport which, quite frankly, is the last closet, really, when it comes to sort of people openly feeling comfortable admitting their sexuality. I mean, on the one hand, it's pretty depressing that more sportsmen, more footballers in particular, haven't felt able to come out over the years. I mean, when you think about the awful situation of Justin Fashanu, who came out and suffered years years of bullying and off the pitch and from the terraces and in other parts of his life as well, and the sort of awful tragedy of what happened to him as a result of that. You can understand why others might not feel comfortable over time to sort of stuck their heads above the parapet and been the first. So that all really underlines just how brave Jake Daniels has been. I love the anecdote where he says that the day after he told his mum and his sister that he was gay, they were obviously hugely accepting. He went out and he scored 4 goals in a youth fixture for his team Blackpool against Accrington Stanley. So he said obviously there's a weight lifted off his shoulders. If he can be a role model and show other gay male footballers how it's done and how actually it just as it is in any other bit of society is no big deal, then that can only be a good thing. So good luck to him, I say, and bravo for feeling that he wanted to do this.
Yes, all of this in an interview with Sky Sports News, and the problem for people like him is there is no role model. Everyone goes back to Justin Fashanu, and as you said, back in 1990. It is extraordinary that we're still talking about it, isn't it, John?
Yeah, and he has shown tremendous courage. You just look at his words as well, as Pippa was saying. For someone who's 17, he just speaks with kind of, such strength and, someone with so much more experience. I mean, he talks about how he knows that there might be a reaction on social media, there might be a reaction in stadiums. But he says to people, if they want to boo him, they want to shout as much as you want, that it's just not going to make a difference to him. And I think as well as being someone who is kind of leading the way and showing the way potentially for other footballers, I think he's also setting an example for people at home that might be struggling with these issues. And he's also making football feel much more inclusive for gay people. People who watch the game who now may have felt in the past that they feel slightly alienated by the culture in football can now see someone who's gay playing on the pitch that reflects them.
OK, John Stevens, Pippa Crerar, lovely to have you both on. Thank you both very much indeed.